Some trades don't just shake up a roster, they change the entire course of NHL history. A superstar walks out the door, a dynasty collapses, another franchise rises, and suddenly the league never looks the same again. These moves stunned fans, divided front offices, and created ripple effects that lasted for decades. Some deals delivered championships. Others became cautionary tales that franchises still regret to this day. Today, we're looking at the NHL trades that shocked the hockey world, rewrote legacies, and changed the future of the league forever. Let's dive in. By the summer of 1990, Chelios had already built a resume most players could only dream of. He was a Stanley Cup champion, a Norris Trophy winner, and one of the NHL's premier defensemen before even turning 30. Still, concerns inside the Montreal Canadiens organization began to grow after Chelios suffered a knee injury during the 1989-90 season. At the time, medical opinions reportedly led general manager Serge Savard to believe Chelios might only have a few productive years left in his career. That evaluation could not have been more inaccurate. Chelios ended up playing in the NHL until he was 48 years old, adding 2 more Norris trophies and 2 more Stanley Cups to an already legendary career. In return, Montreal acquired future Hall of Famer Denis Savard, but he was no longer the dominant offensive force he had once been. While Savard contributed as a supporting piece on the Canadiens' 1993 Stanley Cup team, the trade still leaves plenty of room for what-if discussions. Had Chelios remained in Montreal through the rest of his prime, the Canadiens may have stayed among the NHL's elite for far longer than they ultimately did. The image remains one of the most haunting moments in NHL history. Patrick Roy sitting on the bench after surrendering 9 goals, glaring toward Ronald Corey and making it clear he would never play another game for the Montreal Canadiens. In that instant, the relationship between one of hockey's most iconic franchises and its superstar goaltender had completely collapsed. Only days later, Montreal traded Roy, already a 2-time Stanley Cup champion, multiple Vezina Trophy winner, and Conn Smythe recipient, to the Colorado Avalanche alongside Mike Keane. In return, the Canadiens received Andrei Kovalenko, Martin Rucinski, and Jocelyn Thibault. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Roy instantly transformed Colorado into a powerhouse, leading the Avalanche to a Stanley Cup in 1995-96 and another in 2001. During that stretch, he became the first player in NHL history to win the Conn Smythe Trophy 3 times, further solidifying his reputation as one of the greatest goaltenders the sport has ever seen. Meanwhile, Montreal never came close to receiving equal value from the trade. Kovalenko, Rucinski, and Thibault all carved out respectable NHL careers, but none emerged as franchise-changing players. Looking back, the deal has become one of the defining cautionary tales in hockey history. A trade where a superstar's exit immediately led to championships elsewhere, while leaving the Canadiens with decades of painful what-if conversations. Teemu Selanne exploded onto the NHL scene with the Winnipeg Jets, delivering one of the greatest rookie seasons the sport has ever seen. His 76 goals in 1992-93 set an NHL rookie record and instantly established him as one of hockey's biggest stars. But only a few years later, with the franchise facing financial pressure and preparing for its move to Arizona, Winnipeg made a decision driven more by economics than talent. In 1996, the Jets traded Selanne to the Anaheim Ducks for Oleg Tverdovsky, Chad Kilger, and a 3rd-round pick. With major money already committed to players like Keith Tkachuk and Alexei Zhemnov, Selanne ultimately became the odd man out. The trade quickly turned into a franchise-defining win for Anaheim. Alongside Paul Kariya, Selanne formed one of the NHL's most dynamic duos of the late 1990s, helping transform the Ducks from a young expansion team into a legitimate contender. He continued producing at an elite level throughout his prime and later returned to Anaheim for a second chapter that further elevated his legacy. Even in his late 30s, Selanne remained remarkably effective and played a key role in the Ducks capturing the Stanley Cup in 2007. For Winnipeg, the trade became another painful example of how financial realities can reshape a franchise's future. For Anaheim, meanwhile, acquiring Selanne changed the direction of the organization and helped establish the most successful era in team history. At only 25 years old, Joe Thornton was already viewed as the cornerstone of the Boston Bruins franchise. He had surpassed the 100-point mark just 2 seasons earlier during the notoriously defensive dead puck era, and looked poised to remain one of the league's elite centers for years to come. Still, in November 2005, Boston stunned the hockey world by trading Thornton to the San Jose Sharks for Brad Stewart, Marco Sturm, and Wayne Primo, a return that lacked both a marquee prospect and significant draft capital. The trade quickly became one of the most criticized deals of the salary cap era. While Stewart and Primo were both moved again the following season, Thornton exploded offensively in San Jose and immediately transformed the Sharks into a perennial contender. That same season, he made NHL history by becoming the first and still only player ever to win both the Hart and the Art Ross Trophy after being traded mid-season. Thornton went on to define the most successful stretch in Sharks history, leading the franchise through years of consistent contention and helping guide the team to its first Stanley Cup final appearance in 2016. Over time, he became widely regarded as the greatest player the organization had ever had, a distinction that only magnified how painful the trade became from Boston's perspective. By the start of the 1990s, Mark Messier had already cemented himself as one of the greatest players in Edmonton Oilers history. He captained the franchise to 5 Stanley Cups, including the unforgettable 1990 championship that silenced doubts about whether Edmonton could still win after Wayne Gretzky left town. But as the dynasty slowly began to break apart, financial limitations once again became a major issue for the organization. Frustrated by management's refusal to renegotiate his contract, and by the steady dismantling of the roster around him, Messier's relationship with the team deteriorated. On October 4th, 1991, Edmonton dealt him to the New York Rangers. Messier transformed the Rangers almost immediately. In his first season in New York, he captured the Hart Trophy and helped elevate the franchise into a true Stanley Cup contender. 2 years later, during the legendary 1993-94 campaign, he delivered one of the defining moments in NHL history. Facing elimination against the New Jersey Devils in the Eastern Conference Final, Messier boldly guaranteed a Game 6 win, then delivered a hat trick to force a deciding Game 7. The Rangers eventually captured the Stanley Cup, ending a championship drought that had lasted 54 years, and forever securing Messier's place in New York sports history. Edmonton's primary return was Bernie Nicholls, who played an important role during the Oilers' run to the conference final in 1992. Still, the trade is ultimately remembered for what Messier achieved in New York. To this day, he remains the only player in NHL history to captain 2 different franchises to Stanley Cup championships, a legacy that speaks to his leadership and ability to change the identity of an entire organization. Doug Gilmour had already established himself as a core piece of the Calgary Flames' 1989 Stanley Cup championship team, but by the early 1990s, his relationship with the organization had completely unraveled. A heated contract dispute escalated during arbitration, with Gilmour even accusing the Flames of tampering. The tension finally boiled over on January 1st, 1992, when he walked away from the team. Just 1 day later, Calgary traded him to the Toronto Maple Leafs in one of the biggest deals of the era. The trade involved 10 players in total. Gilmour headed to Toronto alongside Jamie McCoon, Rick Nattrass, Kent Manderville, and Rick Wamsley. Calgary received Gary Leeman, Michel Petit, Alexander Godiniuk, Craig Berube, and Jeff Reese in return. At the time, the swap appeared relatively balanced, with both teams exchanging proven NHL talent. Over time, though, the impact of the trade became overwhelmingly one-sided. Gilmour immediately revitalized a struggling Toronto roster and helped spark a late-season turnaround in 1991-92. Then came his legendary 1992-93 season. He exploded for 127 points, still the highest single-season total in Maple Leafs history, won the Selke Trophy, and finished second in Hart Trophy voting. More importantly, he completely transformed the culture of the franchise. Under Gilmour's leadership, Toronto reached consecutive conference finals and recorded back-to-back 100-point seasons, coming closer to winning the Stanley Cup than they had at any point since 1967. For Calgary, the trade marked the beginning of a gradual decline from contender status. What started as a bitter contract dispute ultimately became one of the defining momentum swings of the decade, helping restore the Maple Leafs as a major force while sending the Flames into a far less successful era. When the massive trade was completed at the 1991 NHL trade deadline, Ron Francis was already the face of the Hartford Whalers franchise and one of the NHL's premier offensive centers. Initially, the move did not seem like a complete disaster for Hartford. Francis, along with Ulf Samuelsson and Grant Jennings, was traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for John Cullen, Zarley Zalapski, and Jeff Parker. At the time, Cullen was 5th in league scoring, which made the return appear reasonable on paper. But Pittsburgh's thinking went beyond short-term numbers. The Penguins understood they needed another elite, reliable center behind Mario Lemieux, someone capable of easing the pressure on their superstar while strengthening the middle of the ice. Francis proved to be exactly that. Pittsburgh won the Stanley Cup only months later in 1991 and repeated as champions in 1992, with Francis becoming one of the organization's most important pieces. During periods when Lemieux dealt with injuries and health concerns, Francis effortlessly stepped into a top-line role and kept the Penguins operating at an elite level. Ironically, Francis eventually returned to the organization years later, but only after the Whalers relocated and became the Carolina Hurricanes. Meanwhile, Cullen's stint in Hartford ended quickly. He appeared in just 109 games before being traded in 1992 for a second-round pick, leaving the trade looking far more uneven over time than it did on the day it was made. It still stands as one of the most shocking trades ever made in professional sports. For fans of the Edmonton Oilers, the pain has never fully faded. Only months after winning their 4th Stanley Cup in 5 years, the organization sent Wayne Gretzky to the Los Angeles Kings. By that point, Gretzky had already captured 7 Art Ross trophies and 8 Hart trophies. Yet, he was still just 27 years old and squarely in the middle of his prime as hockey's defining superstar. In exchange, Edmonton acquired a return centered around young forward Jimmy Carson, Martin Gelinas, and several first-round draft picks. Still, the blockbuster move was fueled less by hockey reasons and more by owner Peter Pocklington's financial situation. Gretzky wasted no time transforming hockey in Los Angeles. He won the Hart Trophy in his first year with the Kings, helped eliminate the Oilers in the playoffs, and eventually led LA to the 1993 Stanley Cup Final. His arrival also became a turning point for the NHL's growth in non-traditional hockey markets across the Sun Belt, changing the league's future in ways that likely never happen without the trade. Chris Pronger had just authored one of the most remarkable playoff runs by a defenseman in the modern era, carrying the Edmonton Oilers to Game 7 of the 2006 Stanley Cup Final. He dominated every situation imaginable, playing enormous minutes while controlling games offensively and defensively. Even though Edmonton ultimately lost the series, many believed Pronger had built a legitimate case for the Conn Smythe Trophy because of how indispensable he was throughout the playoffs. Then came the shock that changed everything. During the offseason, Pronger requested a trade for family-related reasons, leaving Oilers general manager Kevin Lowe with limited bargaining power. Edmonton eventually dealt Pronger to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Joffrey Lupul, Ladislav Schmid, and several draft picks. one of which later became Jordan Eberle. Considering the circumstances, the Oilers received a respectable package, but Pronger's immediate success in Anaheim ultimately overshadowed the return. Alongside Scott Niedermayer, he formed one of the NHL's most dominant defensive pairings and helped lead the Ducks to the first Stanley Cup championship in franchise history in 2007. Given the lack of leverage Edmonton faced, the trade is difficult to frame as a complete management disaster. Even so, losing a player of Pronger's caliber left a massive hole in the organization, one the Oilers struggled to fill for years afterward. And there you have it. 9 trades that shocked the hockey world, rewrote legacies, and changed the future of the league forever. So, what trades would you add to this list? Did we miss any shocking trades that truly changed the history and trajectory of the league? Let us know in the comments. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more.